6.3, Enlightened Despotism, here as we roll along with the Enlightenment, still trying to figure out best alignment here. Oh, excuse me. Ugh, that's probably gross. It's gross. Okay. There we go. Okay. 6.3. Enlightened Despotism. So we looked in 6.2 how the Enlightenment impacts economics, religion, different areas of society. We're going to look and see how it impacts politics, because we look, everything 6.1 is theory, right? Different ideas of doing things. 6.2, how religion, economics are impacted, among other things, art, for instance. But 6.3, how typically you would see politicians be impacted. So where does Enlightenment impact absolutism across Europe in the 18th century, and what levels of religious toleration exist across Europe during the Enlightenment? That's ginger ale or something. I'm burning all over the place. All right, so enlightened despots. What does this word mean? Another word you're going to see used with it is the term enlightened absolutism. So you're going to see that from time to time. But we're talking about absolute rulers who rule with the good of the people in mind. In other words, they are enlightened kings. They buy the Enlightenment. They buy the ideas, and they take what those ideas are and apply them to their leadership style. They are not democratic leaders. They are not nice in many cases. They're still very absolute, harsh leaders, but they're going to take the Enlightenment's ideas and use them to try and strengthen their country and perhaps even help their people if you can kind of get both things happening. So they don't believe that the people rule themselves. Okay, so that's a key. They do not believe that the people could and should rule themselves through a parliament or anything like that. They're still absolute, but the way they rule will change. We're going to start with Frederick the Great. Now, Frederick the Great had kind of a interesting childhood. He's growing up in Prussia, a very militaristic society. But he grows up with an education that's a little bit more appreciative of the Enlightenment at that point of time. He loved certain Enlightenment thinkers and their writings. He also liked playing the flute. He liked acting. And I've told you a little story about him, unbeknownst to you, is that he was engaged to a woman in England, and his friend tried to get him out to go visit her secretly. Well, his father, Frederick's father, the king of Prussia, caught him and then had his friend decapitated in front of Frederick. So imagine how that could impact your personality going forward, and if it's worth sneaking out of the house. But anyway, Frederick, Enlightenment childhood, Enlightenment education, and that's going to impact when he becomes king the way that he's viewed in Prussia. He claims himself to be the first servant of the state. Now, contrast that to Louis XIV. Remember the video we saw with him going out to the building grounds of Versailles and interacting with the peasants and how little he understood about their lives. Frederick has seen himself as someone who serves his people. So the goal of his reforms, yes, he's trying to serve his people, but the goal is to increase the power of the state. And if you do that, you, in essence, help everybody else out. So, again, he's not like starting government programs to give people money or welfare or social security or anything like that. He's trying to create an environment in his country that is based on equality, that extends certain liberties to the people, and by doing so, hoping to get the best out of them, it would strengthen Prussia. But in reality, the peasants don't really get and see many improvements out of that procedure. Again, this is a very top-down movement, and it's going to take a lot for the people at the bottom to see improvements. Now, he got older. Oh, Frederick, God, he looked like trash, my man. All right, what does he do? Allows religious freedoms. Prussia is a Protestant, I believe a Calvinist state. It may be Lutheran, I don't know. But it was a Protestant state. He's going to allow freedoms for Catholics, but not for Jews. Okay? Civil freedoms for Catholics, not for Jews. He will promote education through the construction of schools and universities to try to help people progress and become better than they are. He codifies and streamlines laws. And what does that mean, codify laws? It means you take your laws and you basically say, Maisie's crying, I better go get her. It's codifying laws, meaning that he's making laws consistent throughout Prussia, that everybody can look up the law and see how that law would apply to everyone. Easy access to it, so you do not have inconsistencies in enforcing the law. And then he takes all the serfs that are living on land that the king owns and frees them from their obligations of paying their debts to the king. But he does this so that the serfs can fight. So again, he's not, let's put a limit on him. He's not saying, serfs, go be free. Your debts are paid. You don't have to work this land anymore to pay your debt, that we're protecting you. He's saying, hey, serfs, your debts are paid. Now you get to fight for Prussia. Right? So I don't know if that's better or worse or what, but that's kind of the change and shift that he brings about. He also reduces censorship so that it extends freedom of the press a little bit, and abolishes capital punishment and takes that away. And the last thing is, if you're going to work for the government, you got to prove you can do it. He requires examinations for civil servants, meaning if you're going to work for the government, you got to know your stuff. You got to know how to be able to do your job. You don't get a job with the government now by just being somebody's son. You got to be someone who is talented and good at your service job to help the government be efficient. So all of these things are called Enlightenment reforms. How well do they extend Enlightenment freedoms to the people? Well, that's something that can be debated, but as far as Frederick goes, it was considered good enough in Prussia to get the tagline, the Great. And this is an interesting little graphic that I found about German history, because we're going to kind of see something happen with Prussia later. But it says, well, the king conquered, and that's Frederick himself. The prince shaped, we'll talk about that guy a little bit more later. The marshal, or the field marshal, defended. That's a major World War I figure for the Germans. And then, of course, you know the guy on the right. So, in any case, Frederick the Great, we're going to see with Prussian absolutism and his involvement with the Enlightenment and military strength, we're going to see Frederick the Great be a very, not controversial, but memorable figure in German and Prussian history. Remember, Prussia is a German state. So before we get to Catherine, we'll take a break. I'll be right back. All right. Hey, I moved. So someone woke up from a nap. Hey, what do you like to say to everyone? That's what I thought. Okay, so the next enlightened despot, her name is Catherine the Great, and she was not really enlightened. She fits though with this time period and does match some of the things that you see with enlightened despots, but she is by far the least enlightened of these, what we consider Enlightenment absolute monarchs. Now, she's got a wild story. So we got a German princess here who marries into the Romanov family, the descendants of Peter the Great. Her husband, Peter III, was kind of cuckoo, maybe some mental illnesses, and she had, more or less, it's kind of disputed whether or not she gave the direct order, but her husband, Peter III, was assassinated because he was thought to have mental illness, and Catherine seized the throne because there was no natural heir. So she becomes what we call Tsarina, not a czar, but a Tsarina, as a German princess. So we got the ruler of Russia now, who's technically a German, a lover of French culture, and refuses to speak German and Russian. So we know, so just, pause here. The leader of Russia, who is German, who refuses to speak either of the languages and wants to speak French. That could tell us a little bit about the influence of the Enlightenment at this period. So as she consolidates her rule, one of the things she does is put down this rebellion called the Pugachev Rebellion. It was a serf uprising led by this man, Eugene Pugachev, who claimed to be the resurrected Tsar, Peter III. He also might have said he was Jesus. I kind of get him mixed up with something else. But anyway, massive violence throughout the land, serf uprising, murdering landlords, nobles, officials, all murdered across Southwest Europe. And after the rebellion is put down, Catherine is done with treating the lower class with any kind of respect. She gave complete control of the serfs to the boyars, meaning she's not going to stand in the way to try to give protections to the lower classes because they had attempted this great revolt. So no really freedoms at all given to the lowest of the low in Russia after this rebellion led by this man Eugene Pugachev. So like I said, Catherine is ending the support for these enlightened serfs. Now, she does do some things which you could say, okay, I can kind of see a little enlightenment in there. She continues to import Western culture to Russia, much like Peter the Great did. Yeah, I'll get you some more puffs. Be patient. So she continues to incorporate Western culture. Peter the Great did that. Catherine the Great also does that. She supports the first private printing presses, restricts the use of torture, limited religious toleration, and even extends religious toleration and civil equality to Jews in Russia. So there are some Enlightenment things there. She also builds schools for women to help with women's education, and she buys the entire catalog of Denis Diderot. Catherine the Great and Diderot were really good friends. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention, Frederick the Great was really good friends for a time period with Voltaire and protected Voltaire after he had been exiled out of France. Catherine the Great, friends with Diderot, buys his whole library. So you can see Catherine the Great, Frederick the Great, both being pretty friendly with these Western philosophers, philosophes coming out of France. Catherine is also directly involved with the partitions of Poland. We mentioned this before, how Poland gets kind of squeezed together from three different sides. Well, Catherine is one of the big practicers of that policy, and you can see over time, Poland in purple gets smaller and smaller and smaller until Poland does not exist. So maybe something to add to Catherine's biography is that, yes, she is doing some of these Enlightenment reforms, but just like Frederick, they're all in the context of helping her country succeed. And that's what her, and I believe this is Frederick the Great right here, this is what they are all trying to do, is help their country succeed, but at the same time, maybe extend some Enlightenment reforms. So, before we close with Prussia, let me, hold on. Getting some puffs for you know who. There we go. All right, let's close up shop here by talking about Austria. Maria Theresa rules from 1740 to 1780. Now, briefly, you might remember from section 4.3, we talked about. Hold on. Okay, we're good. You might remember from section 4.3, we talked about Austria as a Central European state, as a place that had gained power, however, faced a little tension because of the diversity in their empire. Additionally, you might have remembered that there was a ruler, I think his name was Charles VI. He's not totally important, but he had maintained or written into law that his daughter would take control of the Austrian Empire, the Habsburg Empire, after his death. Well, guess what? Here's the daughter. And Maria Theresa, during her 40 years as Queen of Austria, promotes economic development, gives some serfs some freedoms, and does several things, tries to make them productive. I think she, I'm going away from Maisie for a moment. She's being too loud. I think she refers to her serfs and peasants as sheep. So we must feed them. She basically calls all the people she rules sheep. She was very consistent in doing that. But anyway, helps Austria out, but sets the stage for her son Joseph II, who I believe was the most ultimate and best example of an enlightened leader. And I'm just going to go ahead and list some of those things down here. And the big things, the last two, I think sets them apart. Established mental institutions. Hey, back in the day, we burned people who showed mental illness, accusing them as witches and the like. But now we're caring for them. You make parks and gardens available to the public. You're spending state government money not to strengthen your army, but to try to beautify your city for your public. What the heck is that? So Joseph II is a great example, again, of those Enlightenment reforms trying to strengthen your country by strengthening the morale and the rights of your people, and he takes it to an even larger step. So if we go back to our questions here at the beginning, how and where does the Enlightenment impact absolutism across Europe during the 18th century? I think the big thing to notice is what countries did we talk about? Prussia, Austria, Russia. We're not talking Western Europe here. Central and Eastern. That's where we see enlightened rulers. And it's so interesting because where does the Enlightenment start? It starts in France. But you don't see French leaders incorporate Enlightenment ideas, right? They're still very much divine right. They're still very much absolutist in the traditional way. What levels of religious toleration exist across Europe during the Enlightenment? Not a lot, but the more east you go, you start to see a little bit more freedoms, especially for Catholics in their minority areas, and also for Jews. So that's something you also see going across the way. So enlightened despotism, or enlightened absolutism, absolute monarchs impacted by the Enlightenment. And again, remember what we said in 6.1. None of this will matter. None of these Enlightenment ideas matter until the authority figures make the decisions to incorporate Enlightenment ideas into their countries. And we're seeing in Central and Eastern Europe that process begin. All right, sorry for the interruptions and the puffs and the yelling and screaming. The 6.3 pivotal section to see how and to what extent the Enlightenment is impacting absolutism across Europe.